July 2019. Off the coast of Southern California and deep within the Southern California Naval Operations Range, numerous U.S. Navy ships encounter craft of unknown origin hovering above their training mission. Some simply call them drones, while others believe they are unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs. But whatever you want to label them, there seems to be no rational explanation to either what or who these are. My guest today is Emmy Award-winning television producer and cinematographer Dave Beaty, acclaimed creator of the Nimitz Encounters film. Dave has attempted to tackle these mystery drone encounters with the U.S. Navy in order to figure out what really happened in the Pacific.
What was splashed? Mark bearing and range.
He has established numerous contacts from within the Navy, and he has filed numerous Freedom of Information Act cases, all to uncover the truth.
Is totally clear, no redactions, released the year before.
And the result is a 3-year odyssey which involves missing military files, runarounds, spooked witnesses, and esoteric references to drones hovering above naval vessels within official records. But that is the U.S. Navy encounters with what some people are calling UAP or UFOs. Others are calling them drones. Others just want to call them reflections and something that aren't really there. Depends on who you're listening to. But my guest today, Dave Beaty, is an investigative filmmaker, documentary filmmaker. You have done a lot of research on this. Dave, thank you so much for taking the time, joining me, and letting my audience know about your work.
Yeah, I appreciate it, John. It's a very intriguing topic today, and I appreciate you giving me the time to talk about it a little bit.
Absolutely. And where I want you to start is just kind of the brief overview of what we're talking about for those who aren't aware of the 2019 encounters and what you ultimately spearheaded going after. I mean, you made the Nimitz Encounters film, which I mentioned in the top introduction, but you made the Nimitz Encounters film, which was wildly popular. It was excellent and very well done. If anybody hasn't seen it, the link is below in the description. So you obviously have looked into encounters like these, but just kind of nutshell version for me, what happened in July of 2019. What are we talking about?
Sure. And I mean, it was that film that eventually springboarded me into learning about this event that occurred in essentially the same exact place that the Nimitz Encounters happened in, and that would be what they call the SoCal Op area. And it's a Navy acronym that is basically the Navy's training areas off the coast of San Diego, California. They have about 120,000 square mile training range out there. And, the ships go out all the time, 365 days a year, and conduct training operations. In this case, in 2019, there were, quite a few vessels out there that were operating together, doing pre-deployment workups in July of 2019. And so they were going to be deployed to the Indo-Pacific theater of operations in a, semi-peacetime kind of deployment that they do. And before they go out there, there's oftentimes new sailors aboard these vessels. They go out and practice all of their skill sets and procedures and so on, test firing weaponry, rehearsing medical emergencies, launching helicopters, launching jet fighters, and conducting simulated air defense exercises. In this case, there were a whole bunch of destroyers out there that were operating together, and destroyers sometimes do anti-submarine training, they do anti-air training. And they were operating out there together called, I think it's called Destroyer Squadron 23, or Desron 23. And what happened really, based on what I originally found out, was that they began observing mid-month these lights that were logged as either UAV, they would sometimes use the term UAVs, like unmanned aerial vehicle. They would put down unidentified drone. They would list UAS, unmanned aerial system, in these descriptive log entries that I began seeing. So this went on night after night on one of the destroyer logs that I first received. And again, by getting to the end of this log, I didn't really have too much information because, again, I knew that they were seeing these objects, but I didn't know what that meant, whether they were part of some training exercise. Maybe the Navy was conducting some kind of training with drones. I mean, you imagine today's Navy, they are operating drones, and perhaps that was what I was seeing in these logs. But, through some sources and context that I had made, I eventually learned that I don't think that these were something that the Navy expected, nor being operated by our Navy.
And what were the logs that you're referencing right now? What ship was that for?
That was the USS Kidd, and essentially somebody had contacted me and had clued me into these events that were happening on the USS Kidd, the destroyer. And he said that these were incidents that were very similar to the 2004 USS Nimitz Tic Tac encounter that had occurred in November of 2004. He said it was the same area and they were the same type of objects. And he said, he asked me if I had heard about this incident in July of 2019, and I said I had not. So I conducted a FOIA request for the month of July for the USS Kidd, and that's kind of where I began, looking at these logs and seeing that there really was some kind of sighting going on. And when I brought that back to his attention, I said, that these logs mention UAV and unidentified drones and so on. Couldn't these be some kind of military drone or commercial drone? And he said absolutely not, that he was very confident that these were not identified drones and that they weren't drones according to him. So
when you were approached, he ultimately had the UFO UAP approach to you, meaning like, hey, these are part of the phenomena that everybody's talking about right now. How did he or she, I'm just saying he generically, but how did they phrase it to you that set you off like, hey, this is something I want to investigate?
Well, when the gentleman first contacted me, it was basically because I had requested military service members reach out to me if they were aware of military sightings of UAP, and this was at the end of the Nimitz film that I did. I did get quite a bit of a response from that, and this gentleman had emailed me. He didn't want his name used, although he told me his name, and he told me his rank and career and so on, and he expressed to me that he even had his own experience with the so-called Nimitz encounter on his ship that was out there in 2004. He was serving on the USS Chaffee, a destroyer that's part of the Nimitz Carrier Strike Group at the time. And he said to me that he was out there in the same water with the Nimitz, and that he experienced a very similar air intercept of what he said was a Tic Tac object. But I do not believe that this was the same incident that occurred on November 14th with Commander David Fravor and Commander Alex Dietrich, the fighter pilots that have come forward nationally in the mainstream media describing this event in 2004. And the reason is because I had discovered previously that ship that he was on was not even there in the Southern California region in November, and they hadn't arrived until after Thanksgiving of that month. But I also discovered that those vessels went back out to the SoCal Op area in December. So they went back to port for Thanksgiving, and then in the very beginning of December, they went back out into the training range and began conducting the same exact types of training that I described earlier. Launching fighter jets and so on. And this gentleman said he was on the USS Chaffee and that he indeed helped conduct an intercept from that radar room, the Combat Information Center on Chaffee.
So it was not to step on you, I just want to clarify. So it was through your research you were able to deduce that they weren't there during the Tic Tac encounter that we talk about now, but rather that this is likely something else. Did they give you dates or times or anything else to go off of?
No. In fact, it was sort of hard for me to get information from the gentleman. In fact, he never let me conduct a full interview with him or answered many of my questions. He did provide a lot of details, and I was never able to figure out exactly which date it was. I mean, he himself didn't have, this was like 14, 15 years ago. He didn't know exactly which day it was, but he remembered the incident very well. He said that 2 jets were launched. 1 jet had to turn around because of some type of equipment malfunction, and it ended up being a single ship intercept. And he recalled the radio calls from this fighter pilot during that intercept. And this gentleman actually played kind of the similar role that Kevin Day did in the Nimitz film that I produced. He was a similar type of person, and they actually knew each other. So that was his perspective of the radar screens on the USS Chaffee conducting an intercept. Unfortunately, I was never able to find a corroborating witness for that case, John. So to this day, it's sort of, I guess anecdotal. It's one person's claim that this happened, and I can't verify it.
Mm-hmm. But the claims about other encounters, that's where you got the kind of the next idea, because you went after not only the logs from the kid, but I believe that you went through the Chaffee logs and quite a few others.
So put it this way, that gentleman, after telling you that, which kind of was like, wow, is he telling the truth? And I verified, who he was, and I believed he wouldn't just, be pulling my leg, so to speak. But, the proof was like, he said, hey, did you hear about the USS Kidd, this other ship that apparently had something happen in 2019? I said I hadn't. And so I decided, well, I'll go check it out because I can get the logs for the Kidd. Maybe there's something in there that would verify that what he's telling me is true. And even before I looked at him, he was saying that, hey, they had like this anomalous, encounter with these objects. He said it was the same type of objects that the Nimitz had encountered, Tic Tacs, for instance. That's what he made that reference. And when I looked at the Kidd logs, I saw that, yeah, look, there's all these references to, these objects that they were seeing. It didn't say what they were. It just said kind of unidentified drone. I also noticed that the logs mentioned the other vessels that they were operating with, the other destroyers, the carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt, the John Finn, the Rafael Peralta, all these destroyers that they were looking at. So I began looking for the logs for those other vessels. I kind of started putting the pieces together, so to speak, of what ships were there. Let's try to get every single log that we can of all these ships and start comparing them and maybe correlating dates and times and looking very closely at all the descriptions to see if there's anything anomalous. And I think it was about this time that it was Mark Ciccati, another researcher, reached out to me because I was posting a lot of this stuff open to the public on social media. I was sharing a lot of my discoveries, and he reached out to me and said he was also investigating this case and that he had done some FOIA requests himself. So we began sharing documents, and my thought was, well, if he's going after these ships, if he's going after these 4 vessels, I'll go after these other 4 vessels. So we're just not duplicating the same exact requests, and then we can come together and share the material once we receive it. So this was like in 2020, going into that later that year, and eventually we began receiving the responsive records for all these vessels. And sure enough, I mean, startlingly enough, all of these vessels were reporting seeing unidentified drones. And some of the logs are, like the ship is surrounded by UAVs, or there's a white light hovering over the flight deck. Pretty interesting. Also, something I noticed that it was only at night that these sightings happened. I didn't really see anything during the day, but again, at that point, I didn't know if these were some kind of training exercise. Mark stumbled upon, during one of his FOIA requests, a section of emails that he shared with me that basically then revealed that, no, the Navy did not know who was operating these drones or UAVs or whatever they are. They actually were out actively trying to figure out where they came from, who owned them, and what they were.
This is where my skepticism comes out a little bit, and I want your reaction to this, because I'm curious. I get a lot of heat, especially for the Showtime special I was on, for giving the idea, or possibility, I should say, that this was a military test, despite the Navy being clueless. That could it be possible? Was there an Air Force presence? Was there something, to that effect? Where my skepticism comes out is what you have researched was all in the same area. It sounds like all three events, meaning the July 2019, November 2004, and then this Chafee one. Chafee? Why am I drawing a Chafee?
I'm not
correct?
sure if it's. I just say Chaffee, but I'm
gotcha.
It's Chafee.
Sorry, we'll go with Chafee.
Okay.
So training exercises on all of them. What is your reaction to the possibility of military, or do you feel that you've ruled that out?
Well, looking at these emails, and I believe we're going to share those with the audience eventually on your website. If you follow the trail of the emails, it looks like that the Navy was, involving their investigative intelligence arm. They were contacting the Coast Guard, who I believe in U.S. territorial waters, the Coast Guard is sort of in charge of law enforcement on high seas, and they would be the ones that would, go out to other ships and so on. And they were looking at civilian ships that were in the op area at that time. And again, this is, these areas are shipping channels and so on. So even though the Navy does use these and can block off specific areas from civilian traffic, oftentimes there's other ships out there. There's tankers and cargo ships and fishing vessels. And in the case of this event, they were looking at a ocean research vessel that was out there conducting an American, ocean research vessel that was conducting a study of ocean flotsam. The floating islands of debris and trash out there in the water. And they contacted the master of that ship, and they said, yeah, they actually had a DJI Phantom drone on board. And this is in the emails, that it only flies, a few miles, and they weren't anywhere near any Navy ships, and they certainly weren't flying it at night and harassing multiple destroyers. So, there were several instances where it looked like the Navy was investigating this, and behind the scenes, the emails mentioned that a briefing was given to an admiral, for instance, on this event. This happened like a week after some of the first sightings on July 14th and 15th and 16th. These briefings, or this investigation, was taking place involving this multi-agency task force. Now, we don't know exactly what the outcome was today, whether they did find who was operating this. I would be surprised if, it was like the Air Force that, oops, sorry, Navy, we're wasting your time. We were up there doing something that we forgot to tell you, causing you to launch an investigation. I do know that the Chief of Naval Operations was asked, a couple of years back, and he said that the Navy still did not know who was operating these objects. I certainly don't jump to the conclusion that these were anomalous, UFOs, so to speak. I don't know. I've heard it both ways. The original gentleman that contacted me said, no, these were like flying Tic Tacs, the same thing that Commander Fravor was chasing. And other people have come forward and kind of said, no, these were military type of drones, or drones that were conducting surveillance on the Navy. You have to, if it's not the Air Force, well, who is it? Well, possibly it's a foreign adversary that's coming into our training ranges where all of our newest technology is on display and conducting some kind of surveillance. So that was, one of the prevailing theories.
Do you, at this point, before we go on to some of the other ships and logs and Snoopy teams and Viper teams and so on, just to kind of put it up front, do you have an idea of what we're dealing with?
I really don't. Looking at, the case as a whole, and looking at the almost a dozen vessels that were allegedly involved in seeing these things, oftentimes these sightings were happening concurrently. So around the same time, 9, 10, 11 p.m. in the evening. And they were happening, spread over, thousands of square miles of ocean. It wasn't like all the ships were kind of in an armada, tightly packed together. These ships might be 100 miles apart, like spread all over this op area doing different things. Some of them were together, but other ships were far apart. Yet they are all sort of reporting these strange encounters. Sometimes I don't think the logs reflect the true nature of the extent of what was happening, but my feeling is like, wow, that's a pretty sophisticated surveillance operation that can fly, 3, 4, 5 drones undetected out to these destroyers that are thousands of miles apart and at the same time, and then fly away and get away with it, and no one seems to know where they came from and who was operating them. Combine that with the sophisticated radar systems and helicopters, and you have to ask yourself, that's pretty strange that they didn't immediately see that if it was, say, a drone came flying off a cargo ship or something like that. So I did not see any specific evidence that would suggest that, although out of all of the possible explanations, that's a pretty good one.
One of the other things that you were way ahead of the game on was something I recently posted, but definitely, paying homage to your research and spearheading this, and that was the USS Omaha and the missing logs. Just to clarify, is that a different event or all tied into the same thing?
No, that's pretty much all tied into the same thing. The USS Omaha is a littoral combat ship that, the destroyers and the cruisers, they all have different roles. The littoral combat vessels, I believe they're like trimarans, and they're made for operating in shallower waters and coastal waters and so on. So these carrier strike groups are comprised of many different types of vessels. In this case, you had the destroyer squadron, then you had these, the USS Omaha and the USS Gabriel Giffords were the two littoral combat vessels that were out there in July during these workups. So I assume that both of those vessels would most likely have also been seeing the same objects. So when I was doing the research for the kid and getting these logs, USS Omaha and Gabriel Giffords were two of the vessels that were in my request for deck logs. And unfortunately, the Navy came back. I believe I was asking for July 14th through the 31st or something like that. And they released some logs that began on the 19th of that month, of July 19th, without any explanation of why they didn't give me what I asked for. So I did an appeal through the FOIA system, and I actually was granted, my appeal was granted successfully, and the Navy was given 20 days or something like that to give a reason and respond as to why these logs weren't produced. And what came about was that the Navy said that the USS Omaha uses digital voice recording deck logs when they're at sea. So they don't use pen and paper like every other ship does. They're using some kind of microphone and a hard drive to record the logs of the happenings on the bridge. And that the crew had looked for, they're supposed to save this, by the way, and they're supposed to archive it. But the crew had looked for the logs from July, and they just couldn't find them. They don't know where they were. The previous crew must have erased them or something like that by accident.
Yeah,
and
accident.
The JAG office actually said, hey, you've exposed a problem here. These records, which are supposed to be saved, were missing. So we're going. Thank you for actually shedding light on this issue. We're going to try to make sure that doesn't happen in the future. But the log that I did get on the 19th, going onward from there, showed that the Omaha was tied up at the pier at the naval station in San Diego. So unfortunately, there they did not see any anomalous objects. Other than maybe some drunken sailors or something on the pier, but they did not. They weren't out there with the ship. So the part of the case that started on the 14th through the end of the month, I didn't see anything on that ship. The deck logs are missing. as well for the Gabriel Giffords, the sister ship of the USS Omaha, and another destroyer, the USS Pinckney. Also, all of the deck logs are missing for those 3 vessels. Now,
It's incredible work, by the way, putting that together.
A clerical error on the part of the crew, and I don't think it's they're intentionally trying to hide it or something like that.
So what are the odds in Dave's mind? What are the odds that during this time frame, a very interesting, something intriguing for all of us to want to know more, the deck logs are missing from not 1, not 2, but 3 ships that you've discovered? What are the odds of that?
I mean, when I looked at the 2004 incident, the main cruiser that saw all the objects, the USS Princeton, those logs were missing too. It is in a way, it's disappointing, and you raise an eyebrow and you say, could that just be an excuse? Like, could the Navy actually use, well, we lost them, or somebody lost them, as an excuse as to not produce them under freedom of information, which really is required. And I don't know if that could happen or not. I mean, I just don't have a theory on it.
It's fascinating to me. And again, you were well ahead of the game on that, and I had posted that out, and it's just it's an amazing thing, that just seems to happen all the time with all this interesting material, but that's just me. You've posted a lot about Snoopy teams and Viper teams. Can you explain what those are and how they fit into this story?
Yeah, well, back in April 2020 and May of 2020, when I got the USS Kidd logs, that's the first time I had ever heard of Snoopy teams. And it's basically, it's a long acronym. It's like Ships Nautical and Otherwise Optical Photographic. I don't even know. Like, you can go look it up. But I did find it on the web, and I was kind of surprised. So I asked a bunch of my followers on social media if they had ever heard of this, and I didn't tell them what it was in regards to, and nobody had ever heard of Snoopy teams. But apparently what the Snoopy team is if the officers on the bridge sight something unusual. For instance, they see a ship on the horizon that isn't responding to hailing. They don't have the identity of the ship, an aircraft that is flying nearby that is not a commercial aircraft, suspicious. They can order this Snoopy team to run out onto the bridge superstructure high up on the ship and bring cameras and telephoto lenses, and this is sort of commercial video and photography equipment, and begin documenting whatever's there. And then the Snoopy team's role is to sort of develop a report with this visual media, which is archived and sent off to the different arms of naval intelligence for analysis and so on. So this was the first time I had ever seen that. And these Snoopy teams were called out when the UAVs were sighted. So they might see an unidentified drone. The next call is away the Snoopy team. And then, after that, these logs don't go into detail as to, specifically what they were seeing or what the result is. It just says, it might say Snoopy team is, secured, brought back. And so I was, thinking, wow, I got to find out where these Snoopy records and photos go and get some FOIAs going for that.
So Snoopy, I looked it up while you were talking there, Dave. It's the acronym is Ships Nautical or Otherwise Photographic Intelligence Exploitation. So there you go. That's Snoopy. So let me have you keep going on that. So where are those Snoopy records? Are there photos? Are there videos? Or what other records are there to be found?
Well, first I went to the Third Fleet, and I said, produce any Snoopy records from the USS Kidd during July 14th through 16th to see where that would get me. And what came back was that it was denied fully under, classified information. And they said they had found 6 pages in this particular request that was fully classified. So I kind of, hit a brick wall there. At the same time, I also sent a FOIA, a separate FOIA, out to the Office of Naval Intelligence, thinking that ONI would perhaps have received these records. And lo and behold, they come back and they told me that they had found, I think it was 90 pages of material responsive to the request for the Snoopy photos and videos and so on, but they couldn't release them to me because they contained, sensitive information that was owned by another command. And they gave me the names of like 2 or 3 commands that had control over this information, and they were forwarding my FOIA requests out to those commands, and that they could take up to, I think it was like 6 months or longer for a response. Now, it's been longer than that. I plan on following up on that and trying to see if I can get any more movement on that. I'm not too hopeful, but you never know.
No, that's amazing that you're making the progress. I want to ask you about a little bit more about the visuals and what has leaked out, and how Jeremy Corbell plays a role in this, and those visuals from the Omaha and the Russell, I believe. Tell me a little bit about that backstory. Were you surprised when that stuff got published?
Yeah, I mean, it caught me completely off guard, because this, I think, would have been around March, April, May of 2021, in that time frame, that there were some rumblings that that this material was going to come out, and it was eventually released on investigative filmmaker Jeremy Corbell's Instagram and his website, and also on the website called Mystery Wire. And the first stuff that came out was some photos, I believe, that were from a slide presentation, and then some FLIR monocle handheld FLIR video that was later determined coming from the USS Russell, which, as you may recall, was one of the destroyers that was in this group that I was studying out there in the SoCal in July of 2019. So this event with the USS Russell happened right in the meat of that sighting, and it allegedly showed, according to Mr. Corbell and Mr. George Knapp's analysis, what they described as pyramid-shaped UFOs. If you look at the video, which you could find online, it does definitely indeed look like triangle shapes that are it's green, and these triangles are flashing. I know that skeptical researcher Mick West, who often does analysis of UFO videos, quickly came forward saying that this looks like out of focus video, and what we're seeing is the bokeh or the bokeh of the iris of the camera creating the shape, and these are point sources of lights, probably not the actual true shape of the UFO. But this actually was right around the same date, and in the articles and blogs that were coming out, that team of reporters said that these video and slides were actually leaked from the UAP task force that was mandated to present a report to Congress and the American people that June of 2021. So this is right before that. And so they were making the claim that this video came from a briefing that was given to somebody, and that they had somehow secured this content, which was quite amazing.
I want to ask you, just to clarify, you had said you had heard rumblings about this. Are you talking about, because I don't recall, was that maybe Jeremy had teased it a little bit, or were you hearing from maybe your sources?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know specifically the date, or, I don't think that it was, way before that. It was just basically that something was going to be dropped, and that everybody on social media that follows this stuff kind of gets ready when they're saying that they're dropping something important coming up. And it was a pretty big bombshell, I think, that week. And that wasn't the only video that came out. Soon after, another piece of video was released that, was actually the video portion of the slide graphic that was in the first release. There's a slide that was part of a PowerPoint. And so then Jeremy released a couple more clips of video that showed what I would assume would be the FLIR screen from the USS Omaha that was filming what he said was a round spherical UFO that descended into the ocean.
Yeah, it was amazing to me when that whole era was. I've said this on this program a couple times. I'll say it now again. It's mysterious how all of that just stopped, though. The UAP report came out, and what was leaking like a sieve from the UAP task force or the military, wherever this stuff was coming from, mysteriously just stopped. Now, I know Jeremy has said that he has other stuff and he's doing proper vetting, and that's great. I hope he does come out with more stuff. Did you find that strange that, number one, it was coming out like literally these leaks like a sieve right before the UAP report? But the second part of my question is the fact that the Pentagon was authenticating this imagery, with my caveat of saying they never said that they considered them UAP or unidentified. I could never get them on the record for that. But what they were saying was that they were being utilized by the UAP task force. So we're kind of halfway there to these being, true, what they would define as UAP. Were you surprised at that aspect of the story, that the Pentagon was so quick?
I was. I kind of remember that week when, that material first came out, and I was just kind of floored by it because I had been staring at deck logs for the past couple of years of this stuff, and all of a sudden, here's a video of what I had been looking at in black and white ink, Pretty surprising, especially the fact that it seemed to be pretty strange audio on these recordings of the Navy crewmen, exclaiming that, splash, mark bearing range, this thing just crashed into the water or something. So when, I believe it was yourself on a Sunday night, no less, gets a reply within an hour of an email that, yeah, these are authentic, I was pretty surprised that they that quickly were willing to, say, yep. I don't know who leaked them. I hope that it was authorized and there weren't repercussions behind the scenes, because I know that some of these briefings were classified. Isn't that what you understand as well?
That's what I understand as well. They were classified briefings with unclassified elements, and that was what Jeremy Corbell had published, were the unclassified elements, meaning the briefing slides, and the way you can determine those are unclassified. For those who don't know, Dave, I'm sure you're well aware. But you'll see a U in parentheticals. So in parentheses, that U differentiates unclassified information. The videos don't have any slate or anything that say that they're unclassified, but Jeremy has conveyed that through his reporting. So we know that those elements are unclassified, but the briefings they come from are from a classified briefing. I've tried to get more information on that, sure. But very, very hard to do so. But anyway, there's a little bit of context to it. But
yeah, I did also. I'm just going to throw in there that I had a third party confirm to me that they had seen a briefing and that material from the Omaha was included in that briefing. So
that's wow. Then that takes me to my next question, and this is something that I had recently published here in the last couple of weeks, which tied into requests going back to when Jeremy had published these videos with a couple of the dates and times and ship names and so on. And one specifically was the USS Russell, which you've already talked about, and my FOIA request was for that. And what I mean is I was looking for reports, memos, photos, videos, anything that pertained to encounters with these craft or drones. I called them drones in the request because that was what the documentation said. The slides had said UAVs as well. So it all kind of was able to be provable should the Department of Defense push back on the FOIA. I could say, hey, look, your spokesperson said these are real. This is what they say. So we know, ergo, the incident really happened in this way. That never happened. They didn't push back. But from a legal sense, that's why I always do it like that. The return, however, was nothing on the USS Russell or captured on the USS Russell when it came to imagery. But what came back was a USS Paul Hamilton slide, which had plotted where the ship was in relation to multiple contacts with the unknown, and then the one star indicated where a photograph was taken. Now, that was already published by The Drive. That was not new. But what also came that was new when I got it was like a 6-pixel photograph, but that was it. And after I did clarify, it was taken also from the deck of the Paul Hamilton. So what happened to all of the Russell material? I don't know. I'm still trying to do that through FOIA. So that prefaces my question to you, Dave, is that hearing that, where is all that material? If we already know that it's real, why isn't the Navy releasing it in situations like this? Or have you had better luck with FOIAs going after the same?
Well, I haven't had any luck going after photographic, media, videos, that sort of thing from any of the ships. I did explain the whole Snoopy team, the official Navy Snoopy teams that are going out and filming these things and making reports. When I look at the leaked material from the Omaha, it seems to me that this stuff was being filmed by somebody's cell phone camera. Now, I don't know if the Navy gives the sailors cell phone cameras that they can walk around and film on the bridge and film the FLIR screens and the radar screens, and that this is kind of, there's some way to even actually access that material in a FOIA. I don't really know. But again, I haven't had any luck at all getting any visual information. So these guys that have gotten this stuff, it's really helped me out a great deal. So for USS Russell, I had been waiting to get the deck logs for that ship for approximately a year. Normally, this process for a deck log might take 2 months, but in the case of the destroyers that I was trying to fill in the blanks from July, I believe it was 17th, when Mark Cicatti's logs ended, to the end of the month. So there were about 5 or 6 ships that I basically, in a checkerboard, didn't have any information on what happened. So I had requested from July 17th to July 31st. And I had to push on the Navy quite a bit to actually find out what happened. And some emails, came back to me expressing what had occurred. And they said that my request had been put together with, quote, UAP requests and sent to, I guess what they said, the big Navy in the Pentagon, DNS 36, the Chief of Naval Operations, FOIA department, for further review. So I'm like, oh, great. I'm never going to get them now. And I did reach out to that office and their FOIA liaison officer, who confirmed that, yes, they had my request and that they were reviewing them. And then he said he was going to approve my request. This went back to around August of last year. There were several more emails that went back and forth in October. And then even in December, I never heard anything. But finally, I went, to one of the higher level officers that kind of oversees that office. And within a day or two, I received all of the logs that I was requesting. And when I started going through the Russell logs, I was surprised because it was starting on July 14th. And all the other logs were starting when I requested, which was July 17th. I had already received the Russell logs for July 14th through the 17th. So that we're just talking an overlap here, no big deal. I'm like, okay, well, they just gave me from the 14th to the 31st, which turned out to be what the log was. So I started going through it from the 14th, and I'm going through, and all of a sudden I'm seeing these big blacked out rectangles covering a log that I had already reviewed. And I looked at the exemption for release, and it was designated as B3. And I think 10-130 was the code for this exemption. I went back to my FOIA, and there was nothing mentioned about this B3 exemption. It only listed the one that's personal information. I think, what's
B6.
That one? Yeah, it only mentioned that the exemptions were B6 for personal information. So I'm like, when I looked online for what that B3 meant, and to this day I'm not quite sure because I'm just looking, on Google, and it said that it was related to technical, military, and space information, an exemption. And it seemed to me that that exemption was related to the export of technical information relating to space and military technology. So again, I don't know why they decided to redact the logs. I went back to the Russell logs that were unredacted from those dates, and I compared the two. Actually, I can show you right here. This is kind of what it looked like when I first saw these logs. It's the same page. This is the one that's like got this big black. This one is totally clear, no redactions, released the year before. And looking at what they were covering up was just drone spotted at 265 degrees moving forward. Drone spotted at 252 degrees moving left to right. It just says that over and over and over. That's about it. And I couldn't understand what about that they needed to cover up. And this just happened recently, and I shared that with you. So we're still in the conjecture phase of what is going on here.
And I'm pulling up some references here as we go. The exemption cited on yours, the exact wording, or at least part of it, would be technical data with military or space application. So that could potentially make sense, right? If you start thinking that it's potentially military technology. It does say or space. So that doesn't necessarily mean and space technology. Mm-hmm. Okay, so because I think a lot of people had saw that and got excited. So when I got the FOIA release, right, you were the first one. So my credit to you. But where my monkey wrench came in was that when I had gotten the FOIA stuff back, I had the same redaction that you did with the big black box saying B3130. Which, again, was this military or space application technology or technical data. But the citation wasn't there. So mine didn't say B3130. Yours did. So I went back to the FOIA officer and I said, hey, you know what? What's going on? Another FOIA requester got it unredacted. Second time it's released, it's redacted with that citation. I get it. It's redacted with no citation. Now, for those who are kind of like rolling their eyes going, why is John telling this boring story? In that these citations really mean something. It lends some type of idea to what the information is. And so when I had received the redaction with no citation, they're actually not allowed to do that. They need to cite why they redact information. They don't just redact it for no reason. They have to cite one of the 9 exemptions. So I pushed back, and for now probably close to 2 weeks as we're recording this, I still don't have an answer. But I will say where we've ended up as we speak, the last, and I'm going to try and pull it up here pretty quick, the last communication that I got was that the redaction citation should not be there. So that B3 exemption that we just went over is apparently all a big mistake. I think. I tried to clarify, still can't clarify. The last notice I got was this. Mr. Greenewald, there was confusion with the redaction citation along the process of reviewing. The correct records that you received should only have B6 redactions, which is true, minus that one that had no citation. The letter cites B3 United States Code 130, which was what we were talking about, as these were discussed in previous iterations of the record redactions, but later removed. If you have records with B3 redactions, please notify and we will send the correct ones. If that's not confusing, because I don't know what he says, because his attachment was the same record that you just held up, with no citation, but the redaction remained. So he's answering my question by not answering my question and adding even more confusion. So yeah. I had responded and I said, okay, look, you guys have to cite something on this big black box. And if Dave, if you can hold that up again, and I'll pull you up full screen. And I said, right, so the one on screen left there that Dave's holding up, that is the redaction, the big black box. And then Dave's got the same exact document. There you go. You got it perfect. The same exact document there that has no redaction. And so when I asked him to clarify, that's awesome, Dave. Thank you. So when I had asked him to clarify if that redaction should even be there at all, I still have no clarification. And if it is supposed to be there, then according to him, it should be privacy information. And as Dave gone over, all it was plotting drone points. The right, and correct me if I'm wrong. It was
That's correct.
Yeah,
that's correct.
So,
and I would add that I have received other logs in the same release that also are using this B3130 citation in redaction, and looking at, based on what I have seen with other UAV, the entries where they say UAVs and so on, it looks to me like that's what's being redacted. The strange thing is, like, okay, I see you redacting when they say they spotted a drone. But then I went through the logs and I would get down, like 7 pages later, and I see, wait a second, they spotted a drone here, but you didn't redact it. So I'm not exactly sure what is in there that's triggering this. Is it the word drone? If they use the word UAV, it's okay. If it's drone, then they redact it. I don't know.
If it was either military technology or a foreign adversary, and the detection of either would be classified potentially on some level, that's fine. They black it out and redact it.
Yeah.
But this is such a mess on something that, skeptics want to believe that it's very simple, where it is just a drone or UAS of some kind.
Right.
Why all this mess? I know I kind of asked you your thoughts in the beginning of the show, but if I can just ask you again, why do you think there's such a mess with these encounters where if it was classified, just redact it, call it B1, and call it a day? But instead, they're tying this up to UAP reviewing procedures. It's taking 3 times as long to get information from them. And then you have situations like this where, hey, I love FOIA officers, they're my friends. I don't like to bash them. But this particular officer is really kind of creating a lot of confusion and very much unneeded, because if they just followed what they're supposed to do, we'd either have no redaction like you have, or a redaction also like you have with a proper citation.
Yeah.
I don't know what to believe. Why do you think that is?
When I think about the last 2 or 3 years of this whole thing, going back from the very beginning, the person that tipped me off on it was saying, hey, you should look into this because the Navy had this Tic Tac UFO encounter in 2019. And I was kind of skeptical. And then when I started looking at the logs, it didn't really say anything very anomalous. And so going along, it started for me with UAP, and then it went to drones and UAVs, and then it went to the Navy seemingly not knowing what these were and trying to call the Coast Guard to figure out if they could help them identify the operator of these drones or whatever they were. And then we go to, we go forward and we see that the UAP task force that is studying military incursions with unknown aerial objects suddenly is taking reports from July 2019 and including them in classified briefings. And then, after this goes to the mainstream media and it goes out there that the mystery drone swarms, were harassing destroyers off of Southern California, and all of a sudden now the Navy becomes aware of it. Now, if you try to get a FOIA request for any of this material, it suddenly goes from the Navy History Command to the Pentagon for review as a UAP request. You see what I'm saying? It's just twisting around going. In the very beginning, I may have just said, boy, maybe this guy was just wrong. And, his buddy was telling him a tall tale, like, hey, we were flying some new technology out there and we thought it was like a UFO, tell your buddy, and I wouldn't have been the wiser for it. But really, I think I really say it was kind of opening a can of worms when I first started going down this path. And I think that the public has a better sense of information about it, but then the Navy seems to be pushing back and saying that this stuff is classified. A lot of the material is being briefed to Congress, and that it's military and space applications. It's national security, and I'm kind of probably at the same place I was. I just don't know.
How many people have you spoken with, or what you would consider witnesses to these events? Like, how many people have you brought forward, or have been able to correspond with?
When I was researching the kid logs for that month, I decided to see if I could contact anybody. The original man that had tipped me off to it, he wouldn't provide me with communication with his friend that served on the kid, that was there that day, that saw these things and kind of reported to him about it. So I never did learn his identity. He did not want to talk to me directly. So I started going out into public, open source areas of the social media and trying to find sailors that were stationed on Kidd during this training workup, which is surprisingly and kind of it's kind of scary that you can do this, that this material is out there. But the military units do like to keep kind of photographic records and yearbooks and so to speak, and this stuff is out there. It's not like they give you their address and everything, but it's not that hard to find. If you have the rank and the name of somebody, you can sometimes actually quite easily find their email. So I began reaching out to people just innocently to see if they would talk to me. And out of all the people that I contacted, I might have gotten 3 replies asking what I wanted. One gent confirmed that, yeah, he did serve on the USS Kidd. And when I brought up July 2019, that was the last communication. So I say they ghosted me. Like, all of the people I contacted, no one would ever utter a word about it. And of course, they probably can't talk about operations if they're active duty military or even training operations without, permission from higher command and that sort of thing. So I don't blame them. But it was just kind of odd that no one would talk to me. And to this day, I don't think one sailor of the thousands of sailors that probably were out there in the SoCal in July 2019 has described in first person what exactly they saw. As close as I could get was a Reddit user came forward claiming that his brother-in-law was on the USS Paul Hamilton, and he, spoke to me basically describing this exchange he had with his brother-in-law, who also wouldn't come forward, but he did share with me this exchange, and his brother-in-law told him that the crew thought that these were Chinese drones operating off a foreign flagged oil tanker, and that when the lights appeared out of the fog around the ship, they were waving and laughing at them because they figured that these were the Chinese just coming to mess with them. So that's about the closest I've got. But somebody's going to eventually spill the beans, so to speak, and actually explain what really happened. But we don't have that.
Did any of them, before they ghosted you, tell you that they were, other than their normal, oath that they would take or speaking on behalf of the U.S. Navy? That's kind of obvious. But did anybody mention like being forced to sign NDAs after this, or, hey, you saw this, but no, you didn't, so shut up about it? Like those types of stories, or did anybody even go that far?
No. The gent that had the brother-in-law on the Paul Hamilton is still in communication, and he occasionally would try to get a question answered from this guy who was, by the way, was not active duty Navy. From what my understanding, that he was a defense contractor. During training ops, they do have defense contractors that are there testing their new weapon systems and computer systems on the ships and so on. So he wasn't active duty, but I don't believe that anyone ever that I personally talked to ever said they signed an NDA. The people that I contacted directly that I knew were on the Kidd that didn't know me from anybody, from Joe, and when I contacted them, they might say, what's in this? Hi, Dave. What's in this in regards to? I say, I'm a researcher and filmmaker. I'm conducting some research on the ship. Do you know anything about the July 2019 training exercises? That was like the end of the conversation. They never responded out of all these people, like the ones that I got to talk. As soon as I mentioned it, boom, they were gone. Now, I don't know if it was because they look me up or something, like, this guy's not working for 60 minutes. I'm not talking to him or whatever, but I don't know.
On that note, is there another Encounters film coming? Can I push a little and see, are you potentially with what you did to the, what you did with the Nimitz Encounters and then the film, something with this? Because you got a lot of fans out there, myself included, about your work. So I'm sure they'd love to see it.
Well, I think what makes those films, the ones that you make yourself and have been involved in as a producer, are stories. And it's not necessarily the finding the explanation or finding the end result of an investigation. It's telling the stories of the journey, so to speak. What's the mission? What are the people searching for? What are they looking for? What happened to them that changed their lives, and that sort of thing. So as a storyteller, those are the things you need. Right now, I don't have a story. I have like a framework of a very interesting tale, but I don't know, I really don't know what the story arc is. I don't know if these are, some kind of classified aircraft system that's being covered up in a very sophisticated way. I don't know if the Chinese are operating off our, in our homeland waters and conducting surveillance, or even just messing with the Navy, sort of tit for tat for what we do, overseas, perhaps. For instance, flying intercepts next to adversary bombers and taking pictures and waving and so on, very close and unsafe. That happens, and I know that there's been some conjecture that could be what this stuff is, but I don't have that story. I don't have anyone telling it. I don't have anyone on the ship explaining what they saw before they may have discovered the real, causation of these sightings. So, I mean, I would love to do it. I just think I need 3 or 4 witnesses to come and give me interviews, and we might get something started, but.
I hope you get that, because it's a fantastic story. Just a couple more questions for you. That hesitation, which I know you along with me, along with anybody that researches this a lot, does run into that hesitation for people to tell their story. I'm never a fan of purely anonymous witnesses, but with stories like this, because people call me out on, well, John hates anonymous witnesses, but your stuff's backed up. Like, these stories are backed up. There's documentation to back it up. There's Pentagon statements to back it up. That something anomalous, well, we'll call it anomalous because we don't know, it's unidentified, was going on out there. So I do hope that those witnesses that you've tracked down, they realize what type of care that you have had as indicative by the Nimitz Encounters film. I hope they come out, because I think that it would be worth their while. But do you hope, do you think, do you foresee that hesitation here as we go forward with now the Gillibrand Amendment that everybody's talking about, and this newfound comfort to speak openly about UAP encounters? Do you think that hesitation will lessen as we go forward?
I think it will. I hope it does. I mean, I think that, when we have exposure such as the 60 Minutes report that covered the Nimitz event, and some of the other cases such as the 2015 East Coast sightings and the naval aviators that spoke openly on the record about that. I mean, I do hope that does promote other service members from feeling like they can talk about it. On the flip side of that, I think that there has been some mention that there are new reporting procedures that if a military service member, is involved in some type of UAP event, that the reporting basically is classified. So again, it's, going back before that when there were no rules really, it's like, can you talk about seeing a UFO? There weren't specific guidelines. Now I think that the DoD has clamped down on that type of reporting, specifically the Navy, so to speak. I don't know about the Air Force, but I would hope that we see more openness, really, because if we do get to a point where these unknowns remain elusive, I think that academia should be brought into this research as well. There's no reason why academia can't study this phenomena. In some cases, provide answers that are prosaic and empirical. I'm not a proponent of promoting one specific theory or hypothesis about these cases. I'm trying to put them together. But I do hope that this stuff is more open and less redacted. That would be a good thing.
I hope so. I'm eager to see how it all plays out. Now, you have chronicled this in writing and have obviously taken a lot of time to create a write-up. And I'm honored that you are allowing me to publish that. And by the time that this airs on YouTube, it will already be on TheBlackVault.com. And it will outline your journey, deciphering a lot of this, discovering what you have. A lot of the documents that you've been talking about, the log files, will all be embedded in that article. Let everybody know who hasn't seen that article yet. What can they expect when they sit down and read it? What are they getting into?
Well, going back to the very beginning of my involvement with this case, I kept copious notes and logs of everything I was finding. And I think that, following the journey of an investigator on these cases is pretty intriguing, because you kind of discover at each turn along the way there's another mystery, and it really is a mystery. So while this article has kind of been going on a long time and is quite lengthy, there's a lot of really good juicy information in there. And for the people that like digging down and putting points together and trying to think of creative ways of solving this problem and maybe getting some more information, you'll find a lot of that detail in there. And again, I think that it's it is a mystery, and there's a lot more answers to be had. And I'm sort of a truth seeker, and I like the Black Vault because you and your group and your website sort of aren't necessarily jumping to conclusions and working backwards. It's sort of like putting it out there and trying to get to the bottom of this stuff and looking for open government and seeking answers using the tools that our government has given us, such as FOIA, and then trying to decipher the results and take the next step. So that's what I did in the piece, and I think it's a worthy read.
I agree. And like I said, honored that you allowed me to do it. I love those journeys as well, because it really shows not only an amazing story about what you uncovered, but you as well are part of that amazing story, and how much work you've put into it, and it definitely shows. So make sure, if you're watching this on YouTube, just look in the show notes below. You'll go ahead and find the link there. It'll link you right over to the article. If you're listening on TheBlackVault.com, you'll see it right under this video. And if you're on the audio podcast version, you will see some show notes as well. And you can head over to TheBlackVault.com and download that article along with everything that Dave has been talking about. Before I close off with you, Dave, is there anything that you'd like to add that I missed during this conversation about these events, or anything like that?
I don't think so. I mean, again, it's a really confusing case, and it took me a long time, going through all the different parts and tracing back through the last several years of the FOIA request and the responses, and trying to get a bigger picture idea of what the Navy was providing to us and what responsiveness they have provided through the documents that were released to various researchers, including yourself and Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp, and their releases of the USS Russell and USS Omaha footage, to Dr. Adam Kehoe and Mark Sicati and Tyler Rogaway at the Drive, that were providing and really detailed reporting about the same event from a different perspective. So I'm sort of proud to be part of this group that is breaking this new information. Again, I don't have a big news site. I don't have a big YouTube channel that covers defense news and so on. But I think the Black Vault is a good place for my article to live. So
I appreciate that, and I look forward to feedback from all of you not only on this show, so make sure you place your comments below, but on the article as well. I'm sure Dave would love to hear it. Dave, in closing, where can people get in contact with you? Do you have a website? Obviously, you've made reference to Twitter. How is the best way for people to reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, you can reach out to me on Twitter at Dave_Beaty, Beaty. The website that has the Nimitz film is www.thenimitzEncounters.com. And in the article, I'm going to put a link to an email that you can reach out to me as well.
And I want to make sure we add this. For anybody who is involved in these events, how can they reach out to you to talk? And what is the best way? Is that email? Do you have any other type of preference?
Yeah, so in the article, I provide an email link that I do ask for people that are that have information that want to share that can reach out to me. On the NimitzEncounters.com website, I do have a mail form that allows you to even reach out to me anonymously. I'm not capturing any kind of information. You don't have to provide an email. Unless you want me to reply to you. Some people forget that. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much open, and you can find me on these platforms, and I pretty much will reply to anybody that contacts me.
Very good, and I hope they do. And I know, Dave, you're going to be doing a lot more great stuff. I hope you share it with my audience. You ever find anything, you have an open invitation to come on back. So thank you so much for taking the time today and talking to me and my audience and trying to make sense of these events and this situation. So thank you for that.